initial primary reason for the war condition situations at the time of Second World War. So after establishment of League of Nations, Hitler disobeyed the League of Nations goals and uh, motto. He secretly collected more weapons from his friendly nations and attacked on Poland. Then Second World War has been started. So that's why the concept of arms control and the ultimate goal of United Nations organizations, that is international peace and security, and also another goals like disarmament and arms control also raised by these institutions like United Nations organization. So the concept of power, the concept of superpower has been uh, crucial concept for this type of arms race. So according to, as we discussed in previous classes, according to Hans J. Marganto, the international relations none other than power politics and arms race. So in this context, we have we are going to discuss about this concept of peace and security. So after establishment of international institutions such as League of Nations and also United Nations organization, the concept of peace and security has established as their charter. So the main problem of the world is facing today is armed violence and also conflict. So the conflicts like border disputes or water sharing disputes or other disputes will be goes for the initiation of the war condition zone between neighbor states or other states. So after the invention of major weapons like nuclear weapons or hydrogen bombs or other bio weapons are is main reason for the arms race. So at the end of the Second World War, we have seen that United States of America dropped two nuclear bombs on Japan, which is placed on one is Hiroshima and another one is Nagasaki. So after that, the harmful effects of nuclear energy began to be realized the world over. So after that, disarmament and arms control aims towards elimination or reduction of armaments to preserve international security by averting wars. So while the concept of disarmament has gained since the First World War and the concept of arms control developed in the late 1950s, means after the establishment of United Nations organization. So in the United Nations Charter, they have mentioned that disarmament and the regulation of armaments as elements in the progressive establishment of international peace and security. So what is the peace in international relations? Means peace is a broad concept and has several connotations. Like in international relations, peace means absence of power. So according to noted scientist Albert Einstein, peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, of law, of order, in short, of government. So peace is a socio-political condition that ensures harmony in the society and nation. So peace has always been among humanity's highest values since time immemorial. So in all societies, peace has been and still in the primary pursuit of people. So however, peace has acquired different notions in different times, and political scientists gave interpretations of peace. So if we discuss about these types of peace, as many political scientists in the area of international relations gave, that is two types of peace is there. So one is negative peace and another one is positive peace. Negative peace refers to the absence of violence, absence of war between human groups. For example, when a ceasefire is made after a war or conflict, negative peace will be ensured. It is negative in the sense something undesirable such as violence stopped happening. So this is the traditional notion of peace. Several nations consider the military might is totally necessary to ensure peace. So such nations increase their defense capabilities, deploying more and forces on borders. So a positive peace refers to the integration of human society. It is positive because there is mutual respect and cooperation amongst the people. So they manage their conflict positively. The concept of disarmament and arms control came into being as a method of preserving peace, as well as shall we see the new notion of peace much broader. So it is based on threats beyond military attacks. The threats may be from terrorism, insurgency, genocide, denial of human rights, health epidemics, narcotics trade, and irrational use of natural resources. So it also means freedom of individuals from hunger, freedom from want, environmental degradation, exploitation, and subhuman treatment. In fact, peace is the precondition to socio-economic development and to the maintenance of human dignity. So, if we discuss about the concept of security, we frequently come across terms like security, national security, or human security. So, here, security is a natural consequence of peace and the first condition of peace. So, if security is in danger, peace shall have to be sacrificed. Basically, security implies freedom from threats, and human security means freedom from fear. So, a state may seek to increase its own security and deter outside aggression by building up arms. So, sometimes the concerned nations try to prevent war that through a bilateral agreement, a long-term treaty, or arbitration, or mediation for not taking military action against the each other. So this will bring a relaxation of international tensions. So after the establishment of United Nations organization, so many conditions like conflicts has raised by between any two nations. The UNO initiated these types of meetings like mediation, arbitration, or discussions to avoid the war condition zone. So maintenance of international peace and security is the main purpose of United Nations. So as we discussed, United Nations is there for the proper maintenance of international peace and security among the all the nations in the world. So just as it was the main purpose of its predecessor, the League of Nations. So this duty is primarily assigned to Security Council in the form of collective security. As we discussed in previous classes, collective security is also aimed for the international peace and security. So the Charter of United Nations authorized Security Council to take appropriate action, even can any force. So, however, the centralization of the use of the force, be it in a state or in a true international organization, is a contentious issue. So, besides it, some other nominal issues are also discussed. So, the United Nations Charter talks of state equality, but critical political powers are reserved to five strongest states by giving them dominant role in the Security Council. So there must be some restriction over the functioning of Security Council too. So it does not incorporate a constitutional theory of check and balance as is incorporated in municipal law. So the veto power act as a functional limitation, but the use of veto power resultant into paralysis of Security Council. In this circumstance, working of another principal organ, International Court of Justice, becomes important in resolving this type of disputes or conflicts between the nations. So this has been evident from Libya versus United States or Libya versus United Kingdom, famously known as Lockerbie case in the light of charter and customary international law. So further correlate our relationship between Security Council and International Court of Justice with respect to resolution of 731 and 748. So there is a need to redraft these constitutional document to fulfill the aspiration of world community. So it is necessary to create a just and healthy world order by expanding Security Council and made it more democratic. So the primary functions and powers of Security Council is to maintain international peace and security in accordance with the principles and purpose of the United Nations. So all the members in the United Nations organizations are to be bound for these basic objectives of international institution like United Nations organization. So as we discussed after the establishment of United Nations organization in 1945, so at almost at present there are 193 members are part of this international organization. So this is established for the primary goal of international peace and security. So as we discussed, so the security and the peace protection is the primary concern of this international institution. So as we discussed, the arms race between nations is the primary cause for the power race also. So the nuclear and atomic weapons, nuclear proliferation and arms race is the basic instrument for the establishment of war conditions between nations. So the technological development in the 20th century is marked by the advent of atomic and nuclear weapons, which heralded a new era in the field of international relations. So as we discussed in the Second World War, first time the United States of America used these type of nuclear weapons for the first time in the international situations. So nuclear weapon is an explosive device that releases energy, either splitting atoms or joining in the tiny particles inside the atoms together. So nuclear weapons release huge amounts of radiation, which can cause radiation sickness. So their actual impact lasts longer than the blast. So there are two main types of nuclear weapons are there. That is, one is atom bombs, which is use fission as the main reaction, and the another one is thermonuclear bombs, are more commonly called hydrogen bombs, which use fission as the main reaction. So nuclear weapons are the most destructive weapons on Earth. So more damaging than even the biggest normal. So non-nuclear bombs. One nuclear weapon can destroy an entire city, potentially killing millions, jeopardizing the natural environment and lives of future generations. So in fact, the very existence of nuclear weapon is dangerous to the humanity. The first atom bomb tested at Alamogordo in New Mexico in July 16, 1945 by the Atomic Bomb Missile Development Program in the United States of America, named Manhattan Project. So the period of since 1945 came to be known as the nuclear age, because after the dropping of these two nuclear weapons on Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, were bombed in 6th and 9th August of 1945, respectively, that put a quick end of the Second World War. So even since nuclear weapons have never been used. So this period witnessed the production of terrifying weapons of mass destruction for use against the adversaries. So, with the invention of atomic weapons, the very nature of warfare has undergone qualitative change. So, the present stock of nuclear weapons is such that it can destroy the world not in one time but several times. According to one estimate, in a total nuclear war between the two superpowers in the first 3 minutes of the nuclear war, 750 million people would die. So the term nuclear proliferation refers to quantitative and qualitative increase in nuclear weapons and their spread to several countries. So there are two aspects of weapon proliferation. One is vertical nuclear proliferation, which means the manufacture of more nuclear weapons by five major nuclear powers like the United States of America, UK means Britain, Soviet Union or Russia, and France and China. So over the years, many countries such as Pakistan, North Korea, Iran, and Israel developed the capability to make nuclear bombs. So this is called horizontal nuclear proliferation. So the USA had a monopoly of nuclear bombs until 1949, until the USSR detonated nuclear bombs in that year. So Britain detonated in 1952, France in 60, China in 64. In international relations jargon, there's five countries come to be termed as nuclear club. India conducted its first atomic test in 1974 in Pokhran. So the USA experimented with the thermonuclear weapon, that is hydrogen bomb, in November 1952, and the USSR did the same it in August 1953. From then onwards, the arms race started between the USA and USSR. With the advancement of nuclear weapons technology, the nuclear power countries evolved an accurate nuclear missile delivery system capable of destroying any given target at the fastest speed across the continent, known as intercontinental ballistic missiles. The speed and accuracy of these intercontinental ballistic missiles is so overwhelming that the conventional warming systems are almost vanished. So, while over half of the world population suffer from poverty, ill health, illiteracy, and malnutrition, precious resources are being wasted on these destructive weapons. Sometimes some third world countries import sophisticated weapons for the sake of prestige, even when they cannot operate them, and arms exporting countries sell them as they earn foreign exchange as well as influence the foreign policies of the buying countries. Although the use of nuclear weapons has lost much of its relevance in the present times, the nations possess them. Presently, 9 countries, USA, Britain, Russia, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea possess nuclear weapons. According to Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, at the start of 2019, the United States, Russia, Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea had a total of some 13,865 nuclear weapons are there at present time. So the world defense expenditure for the year 2018-19 was estimated at billions rupees. So the developed Western nations account of 88% of this expenditure. So war has now become a phenomenon of total destruction, as the destruction that can be caused by nuclear weapons would be absolute. Therefore, traditional war has become absolute, and today war as an instrument of national policy has become unthinkable. So we have the concept of disarmament. The history of disarmament can be traced back in 1816, when the Caesar of Russia proposed a Great Britain the reduction of all types of armed forces. Similar formal proposals are made at least 16 occasions in the 19th century by one country or the other. So the first attempt was made in the Hague Conference in 1899, which is outlaid certain types of deadly weapons. The Second Hague Conference in 1907 adopted a resolution recommending disarmament. So, disarmament efforts during the interwar period were mostly unsuccessful. They are like the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The treaty made the first step towards disarmament, which imposed restrictions on Germany's armed forces and armaments. It specified that the maintenance of peace requires the reduction of national armaments to the lowest point consistent with national safety and the enforcement by common action of national obligations. After that, the establishment of League of Nations in 1920 under Article 8 of the Covenant of the League of Nations called for the reduction of armed forces to the lowest point consistent with national security. All these proposals was rejected by nations, yet a temporary mixed commission was set up in 1921 to look onto this arms reduction. So after that, in 1921 to 1922, Washington Naval Conference held. Britain, USA, France, Japan, and Italy made efforts at naval disarmament, but it ended in failure. After that, in 1925, after the setup by the League of Nations in 1925, there is a situation happened, that is Geneva Protocol. This protocol prohibited the use of poison gas and bacteriological agents in warfare. The parties to the protocol condemned the use of asphyxiating, poisonous, and other gases, and of all analogous liquids, materials, or devices in it. They agreed that this prohibition should be universally accepted as a part of international law by the nations. So, after that, in 1932, World Disarmament Conference held, conducted by the League of Nations in the First World Disarmament Conference at Geneva. However, it failed because the Franco-German rivalry. So after the Second World War, the major steps towards disarmament can be listed as under the Four Power Declaration 1945. In this meeting, the USA, USSR, Britain, and China signed a declaration in 1945 on general security, by which these nations declared to bring a practical agreement on regulation of armaments in the post-war period. So after that, United Nations Organization set up a commission named Atomic Energy Commission in 1946. On January 26, the United Nations General Assembly set up the Atomic Energy Commission. By its very first resolution, the commission comprised one representative from each of the states represented in the Security Council. So after that, Baruch's plan made in 1946, the first major proposal to curtail nuclear weapons was proposal made to the United Nations, made by an American industrialist, Bernard Baruch, in 1946. This is known as the Baruch Plan. It proposed the setting up of the United Nations Atomic Development for research in nuclear power, and that no single nation be allowed to conduct nuclear research. The USSR objected this plan. So the very first attempt to put nuclear research under international control has been failed. So after that, many commissions and many agreements happened in the history by the after the establishment of United Nations Organization in 1952. The United Nations Disarmament Commission setup has been made by the United Nations organizations to examine and make recommendations on disarmament issues, and to follow up and evaluate decisions made within special sessions. So these efforts ended in failure when Soviet Union withdrew from the Conventional Armaments Commission and United Nations Disarmament Commission. This commission was finally dissolved by the Security Council on January 1952 following a General Assembly resolution. After that, in 1953, Atoms for Peace Plan has made by the US President Eisenhower proposed establishment for a international pool for fissionable materials to be used for peaceful purposes. So this gave impetus to organization of the Conference on the Statute of International Atomic Energy Agency at the United Nations headquarters in New York in 1956. After that, in 1955, the Geneva Summit, the USA proposed the inspection by air of the Soviet and American territory, but failed to become an agreement, that is Open Skies proposals in 1955. So after that, in 1972, the Biological Weapons Convention also happened. This was the first multilateral disarmament treaty that banned the development, production, and stockpiling of an entire category of weapons of mass destruction. More than 155 states acceded to the Biological Weapons Convention. The United States and Soviet Union did not want to give up the third type of weapons of mass destruction, namely nuclear weapons. So they pursued arms control. Thus, post-war efforts towards disarmament outside and inside the League of Nations and the United Nations have not been successful. Mutual distrust and suspicious and have come in the way of disarmament agreements. Subsequently, some positive attempts took place in the form of international and multilateral bilateral agreements towards the concept of arms control. So the arms control raised by the many developed nations and also developing nations, as nuclear disarmament may be difficult to achieve or unattainable, a relative concept called arms control came into existence. According to Hans J. Morgenthau, arms control envisages regulating arms race for the purpose of creating a measure of military stability. Arms control is generally defined to include unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral measures that are designed to restrain the military establishment of a nation or nations through national interaction. So unilateral measures involve only one nation. Bilateral measures involve two nations. Multilateral measures involve more than two nations. After 1945, the term arms control came to describe all the measures intended to reduce armaments between the nuclear superpowers. According to Columbia and Holmes, all arms control measures can be categorized into two. They are: one, arms reduction. Arms reduction implies mutually agreeing upon a set of arms levels for the nations involved in the agreement. In this agreement, arm reduction may be between two countries or on a regional basis, on a worldwide basis. And the second one is arms limitation. Arms limitation refers to agreements between two or more countries designed to limit certain types of weapons, their impact, and to prevent its accidental outbreak. It also refers to arms restraint, that is, agreements between two or more countries restricting sale of arms and military technology to other countries. So arms control thus regulates the acquisition, development, and spread of nuclear weapons. It also includes confidence building measures by two or more nations, such as reciprocal monitoring, inspection of military establishment, and the setting of ceilings for weapons. So after the Cold War, arms control measures shifted to efforts to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons and missile technology to other countries. So if we discuss these arms control measures, the arms control measures aim at reducing the danger of war outbreak and minimizing the negative impacts of a war on human beings. In the nuclear field, some small successes have been achieved, like many treaties happened to control this arms race. And first one is that is Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 26 states. This treaty bans any military uses of Antarctica and prohibits nuclear tests and dumping nuclear waste. It came into force in 1961. And another one is Hotline Agreement in 1963. This establishes direct radio and wire telegraph links between Moscow and Washington to ensure communication between the two heads of government in times of the crisis. A second agreement in 1971 provided for satellite communication circuits. So after that, in 1963, the Limited Test Ban Treaty was signed by United States, Britain, and USSR in Moscow on 5th August of 1963. Later, it was signed by 111 states except France and China. This treaty bans nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, outer space, or underwater, and in any other environment if the explosions cause radioactive debris to be present outside the territory of responsible state. It entered into force on 10th October of 1963. Later in 1967, Outer Space Treaty was signed by 63 states on January 27 in 1967. This treaty prevented states from placing nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction into Earth's orbit. It also prohibited states from installing such weapons on the moon or celestial bodies or stationing them in outer space in any other manner. And later, the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968 was passed by the United Nations in 1968. The three aims of Non-Proliferation Treaty are nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Signed in Washington, London, Moscow on 1st July 1968. It is regulated the acquisition of nuclear weapons. Those countries that had tested and manufactured nuclear weapons before 1967 were allowed to keep their weapons. And those that had not done so were to give up the right to acquire nuclear weapons. Thus, the Non-Proliferation Treaty bans non-nuclear weapon states from acquiring the bomb and puts many restrictions even to conduct research in the nuclear field. Therefore, some of the non-nuclear weapon states are very critical of Non-Proliferation Treaty as it discriminates between the nuclear haves, that is those that already possess the bomb, and the nuclear have-nots, that is those that do not have that nuclear bombs. So India has not signed the treaty and raised strong objections on the grounds of that Non-Proliferation Treaty puts a discriminatory limitations on its right to develop nuclear technology even for peaceful purposes. So India also wants to keep its option to manufacture the bomb because China already possessed nuclear weapons, and by that time Pakistan was also likely to manufacture nuclear weapons. So when India did not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Pakistan also refused to sign the treaty. So this treaty, NPT, entered into force on 5th March of 1970. Initially of 25 years duration, the NPT was extended indefinitely in 1995. So after that, many strategic arms limitation talks and anti-ballistic missiles treaties happened in 1972 and 1969. So the SALT 1 strategic arms limitation talks, the first round of these SALT began in November 1969. The Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev and the United States President Richard Nixon signed the treaty in Moscow on 26th May of 1972. This was an interim nuclear arms limitations treaty which was to last for 5 years. Under this treaty, the anti-ballistic missiles defenses both of powers were limited to, and the levels of ballistic missiles were frozen. In 1974, they signed another agreement which was to be valid until 1985. So, many negotiations between United States of America and Soviet Union slowed the arms race in strategic ballistic missiles armed with nuclear weapons by curbing and the manufacture of strategic missiles capable of carrying nuclear weapons. So after that, many treaties has been happened under the supervision of United Nations Organization. Many peaceful nuclear explosions and environmental modification conventions also made, and the treaty of this strategic arms limitation too happened in 1979, and many missile technology control systems and intermediate range nuclear forces treaty INF 1987. This treaty between the United States and Soviet Union requires destruction of ground launched ballistic and cruise missiles with certain ranges and associated equipment within the 3 years of the treaty entering into force. So it eliminated over 1,000 intermediate range nuclear weapons stationed in Europe. After that, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 1, we called it in short form START 1, happened in 1991. This treaty was signed by the United President George Bush and the Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev. So after 1993, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 2 also signed by the United States President George Bush and the Russian President Boris Yeltsin on the reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms in Moscow. So it implemented reductions in 2 phases in order to meet the established limit on strategic weapons for both states. In 1992, Open Skies Treaty establishes a regime of unarmed aerial observation flights over state territories and enhances mutual understanding of and increased transparency in military forces and activities. In 1993, Chemical Weapons Convention also happened. This is a multilateral treaty that required within a certain time frame the ultimate destruction of chemical weapons, the prohibition of development, production, stockpiling, and the use of chemical weapons. So this Chemical Weapons Convention was acceded by 181 nations. So later, many treaties like nuclear non-proliferation treaties, reviews, and extension conferences happened in 1995. One more important arms control treaty, that is Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty 1996. We will call it in short form CTBT 1996. This is legally binding global ban on all nuclear explosive testing. It envisages an international monitoring system to check treaty violations. So under this treaty, any country would be able to request for inspection to see whether an explosion had been carried out or not. The treaty was approved by 158 nations with 5 countries abstaining. India voted against the treaty on the ground that it was both flawed as well as discriminatory treaty. So while opposing the treaty, India made it clear to the General Assembly that it would never sign this unequal treaty, not later until the major nuclear powers formulate a timetable for the elimination of their nuclear arsenals. So the treaty was to be come into force in 180 days after it is ratified by 44 nuclear countries that have nuclear power and nuclear research reactors on their soil. So the treaty was rejected by the American Senate on in October 1999 through the US President Bill Clinton was the first head of the state to sign the treaty when it was approved by the General Assembly in 1996. Thus, another important step towards disarmament was ended from entering into force. So later many treaties happened for this concept of arms control. And also the criticism against these treaties is that they impose restrictions on missiles. For example, they prevent only quantitative expansion but not qualitative expansion. They do not reduce conventional weapons, nor they do not do they reduce nuclear military budgets. So for the protection of international peace and security, the international organizations like United Nations organization established for the protection of this international peace and security. The problems like arms race or nuclear arms race is one of the major problem for the protection of this international peace and the security. So in the post-Cold War world, there has been paradoxical coincidences of arms race and efforts towards disarmament. Nations in the world began making efforts towards disarmament and arms control so as to save the world from the scourge of nuclear war. So the United States and Soviet Union signed a number of arms control treaties, including, as we discussed, SALT 1 and SALT 2, and START, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. While some measures achieved small success, some ended in failure. It is ironic the most countries are still relying upon nuclear weapons to provide security. So, as we discussed, many situations happening in present times also towards to gain the superpower condition. So this is our mentioned syllabus. So now I am concluding the session. Thank you for your participation.